Imagine a world where a single loaf of bread costs 200 billion units of your currency. A world where you need a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a cup of coffee. A world where your life savings, the nest egg you spent decades building, can't even buy a single matchstick. This is not a dystopian novel. This is the true terrifying story of Germany in 1923, a nation that printed 100 trillion marks, and what happened next fundamentally reshaped the course of human history. The year is 1918. The Great War, the war to end all wars, has finally sputtered to a close. Germany, battered, broken and defeated, signs the armistice. The cost of the war was astronomical, not just in human lives, but in economic terms. The Imperial German government had financed the war not through taxation, but through massive borrowing and, crucially, by simply printing money. The prevailing and disastrous economic theory at the time was that Germany would win the war, annex resource-rich territories, and then force the defeated Allies to pay the war debt. That, of course, did not happen. Instead, Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. This treaty was a crushing blow, both psychologically and economically. Germany lost significant territory, all its colonies, and its military was severely restricted. But the most crippling provision was Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, which forced Germany to accept full responsibility for the war and consequently pay massive reparations to the Allied powers. The exact figure for these reparations was not set until 1921, but the initial demands were staggering. The final bill came to 132 billion gold marks, a sum so immense that the renowned economist John Maynard Keynes, who was part of the British delegation, resigned in protest, calling the treaty a Carthaginian peace that would destroy the German economy and lead to future conflict. He was tragically right. The new government, the Weimar Republic, was born into this impossible situation. It was a fragile democracy, constantly under attack from both the far left and the far right, and burdened with a debt it could never realistically repay. The initial strategy of the Weimar government was to try and pay the reparations, but they quickly ran out of gold and foreign currency. So they did what seemed like the only option. They printed more paper marks to buy the foreign currency needed for the payments. This was the first fatal mistake. Every time they printed money, the value of the mark dropped, making the next reparation payment even more expensive in terms of paper marks, requiring even more printing. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. By 1922, the mark was already in trouble, but the real catastrophe began in January 1923. Germany defaulted on its reparation payments, specifically coal and timber deliveries to France and Belgium. In response, French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr region, Germany's industrial heartland, seizing control of factories and mines. The German government's reaction was a policy of passive resistance. They encouraged the workers in the Ruhr to go on strike and refused to cooperate with the occupying forces. To support these millions of striking workers and their families, the government promised to continue paying their wages. But where would the money come from? The answer was simple, terrifying, and ultimately ruinous: the printing press. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, went into overdrive. They printed money at a rate that defied comprehension. The printing presses ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. New printing companies were contracted, and even private firms were brought in to help churn out the endless stream of paper currency. The numbers became meaningless. In January 1923, a US dollar was worth 17 US Ehrenmarks. By July, it was 160 US Ehrenmarks. By August, it was 6 million marks. By October, it was 2 billion marks. And by the peak in November 1923, the exchange rate was an astronomical 2 trillion marks to 1 US dollar. The mark had lost all meaning. It was no longer a medium of exchange. It was a joke, a symbol of national humiliation. The social fabric of Germany began to tear apart. The most immediate and devastating effect was on the middle class, the very backbone of the nation. People who had saved diligently their entire lives, teachers, civil servants, small business owners, saw their life savings held in bank accounts, bonds or pensions evaporate overnight. A man who had saved 100,000 marks before the war, a respectable sum, found that it couldn't even buy a single tram ticket. The elderly, living on fixed pensions, were reduced to abject poverty, forced to beg or starve. The very concept of thrift and hard work, central to the German ethos, was destroyed. Why save when the money would be worthless tomorrow? Life became a frantic daily race against the clock. Workers were often paid twice a day, sometimes in wheelbarrows or laundry baskets, because the money would lose value between the morning and the afternoon. As soon as they received their wages, they would rush to the shops to buy anything: food, clothes, furniture, anything tangible before the prices were raised again. Shopkeepers would change prices multiple times a day. Restaurants would refuse to quote a price for a meal until the moment it was served, because the cost of the ingredients might have doubled during the time it took to cook it. People burned the paper money for fuel because it was cheaper than buying wood or coal. Children played with stacks of high-denomination banknotes like building blocks. The 100 trillion mark note, the ultimate symbol of this madness, was issued, a piece of paper representing a number so large it was incomprehensible, yet practically worthless. The entire economy reverted to a primitive form of barter. Farmers, who had real assets, food, refused to sell their produce for worthless paper. They demanded goods in return: machinery, clothing, or gold. Those with foreign currency or assets in stable currencies became the new elite, while the vast majority suffered. The psychological impact was profound. The experience created a deep, lasting trauma in the German psyche, a fear of instability, and a distrust of democratic institutions that had failed to protect them. This economic chaos created a fertile ground for political extremism. The moderate parties of the Weimar Republic were discredited. Who could trust a government that had allowed this to happen? The vacuum was quickly filled by radical voices promising order, stability, and a return to national pride. On the right, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party saw their opportunity. In November 1923, at the very peak of the crisis, Hitler attempted the beer hall putsch in Munich, a failed coup d'etat. While the coup failed, the trial that followed gave Hitler a national platform, transforming him from a fringe agitator into a national figure. The hyperinflation crisis was the backdrop against which his political star began to rise. The anger, the fear, and the sense of betrayal felt by the ruined middle class became the core of his support base. The crisis, however, did not last. The Weimar government, under the new Chancellor Gustav Stresemann, finally took decisive action. On November 15, 1923, the Reichsbank, led by Hjalmar Schacht, introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark. The Rentenmark was not backed by gold, but by a mortgage on all of Germany's land and industrial assets. This was a psychological masterstroke. It gave the public something tangible to believe in, the real wealth of the nation, rather than just paper promises. The exchange rate was set at 1 Rentenmark for 1 trillion old paper marks. The printing of the old paper marks was immediately stopped. The government slashed spending and laid off hundreds of thousands of public employees. The public, desperate for stability, accepted the new currency almost immediately. The hyperinflation stopped dead in its tracks. The nightmare was over. The stabilization of the currency was a miracle of economic policy and public confidence. It ushered in a period known as the Golden Twenties, a brief era of relative prosperity, cultural flourishing, and political stability for the Weimar Republic. But the scars remained. The hyperinflation of 1923 left an indelible mark on the German people. It taught them a terrible lesson: that money is not real, that savings can vanish, and that the state can fail catastrophically. This memory became a powerful political tool. Hitler would constantly invoke the trauma of 1923 in his speeches, blaming the November criminals and the international forces he claimed were conspiring against Germany. When Hitler came to power a decade later, his economic policies were heavily influenced by the fear of inflation. He prioritized public works and rearmament, but always with a tight control over prices and wages, ensuring that the ghost of 1923 would not return. The story of Germany's 100 trillion marks is a cautionary tale for the ages. It demonstrates the fragility of fiat currency, the catastrophic consequences of unchecked money printing, and the devastating social and political fallout when an entire nation loses faith in its economic system. It is a stark reminder that money is fundamentally a matter of trust. When that trust is broken, the consequences can be more destructive than any bomb, paving the way for the darkest chapters in history. The hyperinflation didn't just destroy the German economy. It helped destroy German democracy, proving that economic stability is the essential foundation upon which all political freedom rests.